Hello and welcome to the Discover History YouTube channel, and today I want to talk about bloodletting. And the main reason for that is I've just noticed, just going through our playlist, that we've got a lot in social history, a lot of videos in social history, a lot in military history. We've also got a lot in some of the local history ones as well. However, I did notice that in the medical one we've only got, I think, 4 or 5 videos in there, that's all, and they were mainly created as a request from a few teachers that were studying the history of medicine and wanted to use those in classrooms. And what you have to remember about these videos is we're quite open to suggestions. So if you are doing some homeschooling, or you're a teacher wanting a specific thing taught, or maybe you're a member of a home education group, just let us know what video you would like us to do and we will do one for you. We're quite happy. What you have to remember is we've got stuff from the Stone Age up to the 1950s, so we cover a broad area, and as you can see from the playlist, everything from social, military history and so on. So I noticed that there is a very small number of videos on medicine, and therefore I decided to add to that in today's video, and we're looking specifically at bloodletting. Now, you've got to look at what the theories were long ago. So before we knew about the circulatory system, which is really something from the 17th century, before we have a better understanding of, for example, blood transfusions and all that sort of thing, way back in history, people believed we were made up a very delicate balance of what was called the 4 humours. And this is something that goes right back in history to the ancient Greeks, for example. Now, I've got a very simple chart to show how that works, and I'll just talk you through it. And basically, our bodies are, or what they thought, was mainly made up of those things. Now, the humours, also referred to as the elements as well, because they are linked, consisted of the 4 things that make up a human's. So at the very top there, we've got blood, and that's obviously associated with fire. And then as we go round, we've got black bile. That's another item or another ingredient in a human being, so that's often connected with earth. Then as we come round, we've got the phlegm, which is an absolutely disgusting word, really. I think it's a word that should be very rarely used, and that's associated with water. And then when we come over to this side, we've also got yellow bile, which is associated with air. And throughout history, a lot of doctors and physicians often used to say you can test for those, because obviously our bodies are made up of fire. You've only got to touch for example, your arm or a leg, you will be able to feel that there's heat there. So there must be a fire raging inside. And then they also said, if you look at air, for example, we're made up of air, and it was often said that some people are made up of more air than others. But if you put your hand in front of your mouth, for example, you can feel air coming out. So that's obviously part of what our makeup is. And then obviously we're made up of water. There's a lot of liquid in a body, obviously in blood, in tears and so on. And then obviously they often said we're made of earth, because that gave us the form, the human form. And if you think about long ago, people would often think, well, if you make a statue or a human form, they're often made in clay, for example. So obviously earth, clay, we must be made of that also. And you will also notice they're also associated with things such as hot and dry and cold and wet, and therefore when some people are feverish, they're often cold but also hot, for example, burning up, and then sometimes people are shivering in very cold. So you can see their theory, their ideas about the 4 humours. And it was often said years ago that an imbalance of any of those 4, even a slight imbalance of those 4, would cause illness or some form of ailment as such, really. So doctors knew that theory, and that theory went for a very long period of time, until really modern science comes along. So if you have an imbalance and you're showing that, for example, you're sweating or you're very cold and shivering, then it was normal to purge the body. And this was a very ancient form of making people's 4 humours come into balance again, to try and level up the scales again. And that often meant a number of things. You could be purged with a potion. In other words, you would drink something, and the ancient Egyptians were very much into that. You would drink a mixture and it would almost instantaneously make you vomit, and therefore you are purging your body and creating balance again. Some other people also said you should take something, maybe some pods, some seed pods for example, and they could be ground up or you could eat them whole, and that would go into the stomach and cause basically an explosion in your underpants. It will create a purging from the back end as well. So there was lots of different ways to create balance, but the most common years ago was actually bloodletting, and there was many different methods of bloodletting. Now I'm going to show you an array of bloodletting techniques. However, as I always say, don't try it at home, especially if you look at the other videos and look at how we amputate an arm or a leg. Please don't try these at home. And obviously these techniques appear at different times in history. Some of them are actually resurrected, as you will see in a moment, but as I said, we can only do really a 15-minute video, so it has to be a whistle-stop tour. But I would advise you do have a closer look at these techniques and explore them further. So one of the main methods was actually to bloodlet by cutting the skin. In other words, creating blood to come from, for example, a capillary, which are directly under your skin, so you won't get that much blood, but you'll get blood starting to pool and ooze out. Or you could cut a vein. What you don't want to cut is an artery, and the problem is, as I mentioned, we didn't have a full understanding of our circulatory system for a very, very long time. So there were mistakes, we know that, and that's the interesting thing about medicine. I always find there would have been a lot of people dying over the years just to give us the medicine that we have today. And in a way, you could say that with food. If we all enjoy the food in our cupboards, for example, it must have took several Stone Age people to die before they realised which vegetables, which mushrooms, which berries were safe. Now, there are different ways of doing the bloodletting by actually creating a cut on the surface. This is a copy of an ancient Roman scalpel, or what you could call a blade of some description, and it's two-ended, so we've got a smooth rounded one and a more pointy one. Really, these were general tools that were used for all sorts of tasks. So these could be used for lancing a boil, for opening up a wound bigger if there's an arrow, for example, to actually allow you to take it out easier. It was a general scalpel, and if you look at them, they don't change that much from what we have today. And this is part of a big set of medical instruments that I have, that I use when I do Roman or ancient Greece or even ancient Egypt to a certain degree. Very intricate sets of equipment. We'll have to do a video one day just on Roman surgical equipment, because I think it's very, very well made, very, very fine things. So these would be used literally to cut into the skin. And by the Middle Ages, they actually invented a special tool specifically for that, which was often referred to as the Fleem, and it's two-ended. And I think I used this in one of my other videos as well. So at this end, you've got the dog tooth, really, the puncture tool, and it's heavier at that end as well. And then at the other end, there is a small blood channel, and hopefully you can see that on the video. So the idea is this would be flicked into the skin, that would puncture the hole, and then the grooved or channel end would then be inserted to allow the blood to drain off. And obviously these doctors would have done it to the point where the balance was created again, person feels better, bandage them up and get them on their way. There were problems. We know for a fact that some people were bled too much, and we also know that today the more blood you take from a person, the weaker they actually become. So in some cases it can cause major problems. By the 17th and 18th centuries, there was even secret ways of extracting blood from people. Some people were terrified of seeing devices like scalpels, blades, fleams and knives. So this is actually a very clever fleem, or a very clever bloodletting device. And you can see the blade at the bottom, a very, very sharp blade. But on the top, we've actually got a coin. Sometimes these even had, for example, just a token, and you could, for example, hold it in your hand like so, and you wouldn't actually know there is a blade underneath. A very clever way of actually cutting the skin. When you get to the Victorian period, you do actually have a special device, which is actually like a box, and it's spring loaded. You place it on the skin, you press the button, and it scrapes or slices into the skin. I've actually got one of those. That's hidden away at the moment, and it's a device that I don't use very often because it's unbelievably sharp. But as well as cutting into the skin and bloodletting people that way, often trickling it into a bleeding bowl, by the way, there were other methods. And one of the things that everyone always talks about, because it's the big thing in the medieval period, is obviously the use of leeches. And leeches have been around for a very, very long time. We know people right back in history were using them. There was a big draw for leechcraft as such by the Anglo-Saxon in the Norman period. And here we have a Tudor picture showing someone using leeches there. And what I will draw your attention to is the leech jar just of there. And just like anything in history, social, military or whatever, we do have a number of props. So instead of just showing a picture, what we've actually got here is a replica leech jar. And if you have a look at that one and compare it to the one in the picture, you will see we do like to get lots and lots of authentic objects that can be used. This is a nicely hand blown glass, as you can see, and you will also see quite a few imperfections in it. It's quite green, and there's also tiny little marks into the glass, which is normal really with old style glass. And what they would do with those is they would place them onto the skin, and obviously the jaws and the saliva in the leech will keep the blood flowing. The leech gets bigger and bigger, and then you pop them off back into your jar to use on someone else. And leeches have been reintroduced, for example, in a lot of hospitals today. So in a way, we can see the need for them and the use for them really. Medicinal leeches can be quite useful for the body to take away some toxins, for example. But another method has to be this one, which involves cupping. And there was really two styles of cupping long ago. And interestingly, this has been reintroduced as well. There is something called dry cupping, and there's also something called wet cupping. Wet cupping usually involved the scarring of the skin. So first of all, to make a tiny little incision into the skin. It's used today even. And then you use these cups, and it's not a case of pouring the blood into the cup. The way these work is you have to heat them up. The most common way of heating them up is taking a small square of linen. You drop that when it's on fire inside the cup. That burns away, heats up the glass, and then when you're wet cupping, you place that over the little cut that you've made. And obviously, as the glass, or in this case my Roman one, which is made out of bronze, as it cools down, it creates a vacuum and therefore starts sucking the blood. So bloodletting using a cup. The dry one basically involves you placing it on. The wet cupping often involves cutting the skin first, or making a prick into the skin, and therefore allowing this to act like a leech basically and withdraw the blood. And like I said, most of these techniques have actually come back in, which I find absolutely fascinating. I know when it comes to cupping, people are having it now for fashion purposes really. And if you remember back to the last Olympic Games, there was a lot of people, for example, swimming athletes, for example, that did have cup marks on their body where they'd actually had some form of cupping. So bloodletting was a very, very common practice long ago, and it was the norm. If you went to a physician in the Middle Ages, for example, pretty much every ailment or injury that a person had, the norm would be, yes, we'll bloodlet. It was a very, very common procedure years ago. And like I said, it was all down to the fact that people believed we were made up of the four humours. And when there was an imbalance of one or the other, it was important to create balance again by purging, be it vomiting, going to the toilet, or in most cases the bloodletting. It was really a common practice really. Anyway, on that note, hopefully you've enjoyed it. Hopefully you're glad that we don't have to put up with bloodletting unless you want it for fashion purposes. So as always, stay safe, and we'll see you with another video tomorrow. Remember, subscribe, and make sure you comment. Let us know what you want to see. We've got 6 weeks of videos to give you until lockdown number 3 comes to an end. So stay safe and see you soon. Bye bye.